Hello and welcome to this programme recorded as part of the Leeds Opera Story. I'm the Artistic Director of Northern Opera Group, David Ward. Since the start of the year, we've been delving into the archives and visiting museums and collections to uncover the 300-year history of opera in Leeds for the Leeds Opera Story, learning about the city's long-gone theatres, the singers and companies who visited the city, and recording the changing tastes of audiences over time. In this programme, we're going to be exploring one of the most popular operas of the 1800s, Sir Henry Bishop and Daniel Terry's Guy Mannering. There are no recordings of the opera available, so we're delighted to be able to include new recordings of songs from the opera in this programme, performed by mezzo-soprano Rosemary Clifford and tenor Alex Haigh. It's completely ignored today, but back then Guy Mannering was hugely popular. In fact, when we look at all of the opera performances we've found in Leeds during the 1800s, Guy Mannering was performed more than any other opera. Here's At Battle Cry from Guy Mannering, performed by Alex Haigh.
At battle cry, or beauty sigh, the soldier feels delight. At beauty sigh, or battle cry, the soldier feels delight. With tender lay, or daring deed, he wins of love, or fame the need, or fame the need. A young and gallant knight, a young and gallant knight, at beauty sigh, or battle cry, a young and gallant knight. In fiery field, the foeman yield beneath his falcon bright. Then welcome, then welcome, then welcome in his laurel bright to Lady Bar, at eve he'll glide, at eve he'll glide. A young and gallant knight, a young and gallant knight, at battle cry, at beauty sigh, at battle cry, oh beauty sigh, a young and gallant knight.
Before we discover more about Guy Mannering, we first have to confront the age-old question, what is an opera? We need to ask this because if you look at the libretto, the lyrics and spoken words of Guy Mannering, you'll see that there's far more spoken dialogue than there is music. It's the type of split that you'd expect from a modern musical than what is usually thought of as an opera. Most of the time we think of musical works that have lots of dialogue as musicals, or like Gilbert and Sullivan, operettas, and those that have no or very little dialogue as operas. There are, however, many popular operas that have a fair bit of dialogue. Mozart's The Magic Flute is perhaps the best example.
Dumme Frage, ein Mensch wie du. Wenn ich dich nun fragte, wer du bist.
So würde ich dir antworten, aus fürstlichem Geblüte.
Das ist mir zu hoch.
Mein Vater ist Fürst, der über viele Länder...
No one would doubt that The Magic Flute was an opera. And then there are many popular musicals which have no or very little dialogue. Les Miserables may be the best example. What we find in the 17 and 1800s is a much more varied and fluid idea of what constituted an opera. Foreign operas, mainly Italian but also German and French, tended to be through-sung with little dialogue, whereas English operas by composers such as John Gay, William Shield and Henry Bishop would have lots of dialogue interspersed with music. Audiences saw foreign and English operas as quite different things. In fact, it's clear to see from the advertisements for performances of Guy Mannering in Leeds in the 1800s that there was a fluid idea of what genre the piece fitted into. Was it a favourite drama? A musical drama? A musical play? An operatic play? A comic opera? A national opera? Or just a plain old opera? Truth was, it didn't really matter what you called it. The most important thing was that you get variety out of your evening's entertainment. From 1771 to 1848, over 75 years, Leeds had just one theatre, helpfully called the theatre, and very few other avenues for entertainment. An evening wouldn't consist of just one opera or play or pantomime, but sometimes 3 different shows in one evening, providing you with some drama, some music, some comedy, and everything in between. In 1836, for example, this performance of Guy Mannering was accompanied by a new ballet, The Scotch Rivals, and a new farce, The Married Bachelor. Guy Mannering was adapted from the popular novel by Sir Walter Scott by writer Daniel Terry and composer Sir Henry Bishop, and it appeared in theatres just 1 year after the novel's publication in 1815. Scott was one of the most famed and popular novelists of the day, and Daniel Terry, who wrote the libretto from the opera, was Scott's go-to man for adapting his works for the theatre, going so far as to send him advance copies of his novels so Terry could get to work straight away on the stage adaptations. The music for Guy Mannering was by Sir Henry Bishop, who at the time was music director at the Covent Garden Theatre, where the opera premiered. Covent Garden wasn't home to just opera in the early 1800s. In fact, it was just one of 2 theatres that was licensed to perform spoken drama, so its output included the classics of theatre, as well as musical drama and opera. Whilst Daniel Terry was better known as an actor, Bishop was one of the foremost composers of his day. He was a favourite of Queen Victoria, and he was the first composer to be knighted. As music director of Covent Garden, his role wasn't just to write new music for plays and operas, but to adapt foreign operas so that they would appeal to English audiences, and so that English musicians, who weren't quite up to the job, would be able to actually play the music. So, for example, whilst we're all used today to the overture of Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, which goes like this, that was a little too taxing for his Covent Garden musicians, so instead, Bishop wrote this. And we know that Bishop's version of The Marriage of Figaro was performed in Leeds in 1829. Bishop's original compositions sounded quite different to continental opera. 1816, the year of the premiere of Guy Mannering at Covent Garden, also saw another of the century's most performed operas get its first outing, Rossini's The Barber of Seville in Rome. So whilst Italians were listening to this, audiences in London were hearing this, In Ancient Times from Guy Mannering, performed by Rosemary Clifford.
In ancient times in Britain's isle, Lord Henry well was known. No knight in all the land more famed, nor more deserved renown. His heart was all on ornament, he ne'er could stop to laugh, no lady in the land had by his frozen heart to move, his heart to move, his heart to move, his heart, his heart to move, his heart to move, his heart to move.
Guy Mannering was a huge success and soon made its way across the country, including up to Leeds. The first performance in Leeds we have on record was at the theatre in 1820. The theatre was Leeds' first, oldest and indeed only theatre in 1820. Built in 1771 by the impresario Tate Wilkinson, it had been entertaining audiences for nearly 50 years by the time that Guy Mannering came around. It's fair to say that the standards and upkeep of the theatre were lacking.
The theatre is miserable and cold, half the upper part of it admitting the wind and rain. The receipts are in general so bad that the manager does not think it worthwhile to repair it, and it is killing his wretched performers. Though I have taken every precaution by clothing myself in flannel and wearing a cloth dress up to my throat, yet I have suffered greatly from colds in dressing rooms running down with wet. At Leeds I was obliged to stand on my great coat to keep my feet from wet.
But nonetheless, it was the only theatre that Leeds could muster until the Princess Theatre was built in 1848. The Princess ushered in a new age of theatres in Leeds, and an influx of theatres being built on the more upmarket north side of the river. Within 40 years of the Princess Theatre opening, Tate Wilkinson's 1771 theatre would be rebuilt, renamed, and finally destroyed for good. The amphitheatre on the hedgerow would have opened, and two of Leeds' remaining 19th century theatres would be up and running: the Coliseum, which is now the O2 Academy, and Leeds Grand Theatre. Here's another song from Guy Mannering, Be Mine, Dear Maid, performed by Alex Haigh.
Be mine, dear maid, this faithful heart can never prove untrue. 'Twere easier far from life to part than cease to live for you. Then turn thee not away, my lover, turn thee not away, for by the light of truth I swear to love thee night and day, love, to love thee night and day, love, to love thee night and day, to love thee, to love thee, to love thee night and day, love, to love thee night and day, love, to love thee night and day, love.
In 1819, a pivotal event happened in Leeds which would go on to shape the future history of opera in the city: the arrival of the first non-English opera, which was Rossini's The Barber of Seville. Whilst this performance would have been in an English translation, it marks a turn from exclusively English opera being performed in Leeds to an increasingly heavy diet of Italian, French and German operas in the city. Whilst Guy Mannering is the most performed opera we have on record for the 1800s, works like The Barber of Seville, The Marriage of Figaro and Bellini's La Sonnambula were becoming frequent visitors. The English Opera Company's visit to Leeds in November 1858 is a good example. Whilst Guy Mannering, Wallace's Maritana and Balfe's The Bohemian Girl were part of their offering, they also performed Verdi's Il Trovatore and La Traviata, and the enormously popular German opera Der Freischütz by Weber. By the time we reach the 1900s, aside from the works of Gilbert and Sullivan, the once thriving British opera of Bishop, Balfe and their contemporaries were hardly to be seen again. Before we go, if you've enjoyed this episode, please do visit our Leeds Opera Story website to find out more, and if you'd like to make a donation in support of the project and our work in general, then you can do so on the Leeds Opera Story website. Thank you. We'll end this episode by hearing one more song from Guy Mannering, Sir Guy Was a Bold and Hardy Knight, performed by Rosemary Clifford.
Sir Guy was a bold and hardy knight, of courage keen and true. O little Kennedy for beauty bright, but some of the sword he drew. Sir Guy was a bold and hardy knight, of courage keen and true. O little Kennedy for beauty bright, but some of the sword he drew. Let fools be the theme of love's light story. I live and die alone. scornful eye she loved, but loved in vain. He saw not a day, heard not